Hello, everyone. Rob Guest from football.london here, and welcome to the latest episode of Gold Guest Talk Tottenham, sponsored by NordVPN. We're back for the second time this week as we're going to be discussing transfers, with the transfer deadline now just 1 week away. Alasdair Gold joining me as ever. Ali, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm okay. We had this kind of grand plan where we were going to start to try to do 2 podcasts a week, where we're going to do a longer one, really delving into the match at the start of the week, and a shorter one, I guess, in the season looking ahead. In the transfer window, the plan was to talk about the multitude of transfers that would have taken place over the course of this week. However, it's Tottenham Hotspur, so this will be a pod mostly talk about what could happen because Spurs are still at the mercy of the clubs circling around them. Some slightly interested in their players, some not. So yes, this is going to end up being a shorter pod, but one really kind of trying to delve into what might, could, and we hope does happen in the days ahead.
Yep, so it's 4 outgoings for Tottenham now this summer. One was confirmed yesterday afternoon with Troy Parrott joining Excelsior Rotterdam of the Eredivisie on loan for the rest of the season. He joins Joe Rodon in heading out on loan. Obviously, permanent exits have been Harry Winks and Harry Kane. And with a week to go now until deadline day, the window closes for business at 11 p.m. on Friday, September the 1st. Spurs have an awful lot to do over the next 7 days. Really need to get motoring in terms of outgoings, or else it could potentially be looking like a very hectic transfer deadline day, the way it's going at the moment.
Exactly what Postecoglou didn't want. Exactly. I did a piece yesterday where I used the exact quotes where, let me see if I've got it to hand, because it is so exactly the situation. What we don't want to don't want to do is have it all happen late in the window, which means we're caught short in any area. Well, Ange, it has happened that way. We are now in the final week of the window, and yeah, Troy Parrott's gone out on loan. And actually, Troy Parrott doesn't even affect the numbers, does he? Because he was on the under 21s list or 20. It's called the under 21s list, but technically it includes players that are 21 in that year, doesn't it? So
Okay.
yeah, so Troy Parrott going out. I think I actually saw people on Twitter like celebrating the news. Hey, one's out the door. It's like I couldn't even be bothered to tweet underneath. Actually, doesn't really make any difference to the numbers, but I won't ruin the fun. And now I have. Yeah, it's. I mean, as I said in the piece I wrote, if anyone wants to look at it, as a piece on football.london, kind of detailing why it's all gone very, very slow. And the thing is, every club's fans all think that everything is exclusive to their club and everything that's happening there is the worst in the world and it's what happens. What I would say, and people know that we're very happy to criticize Spurs when things go wrong, and there's plenty you can criticize about the scenario of why they have these players still at the club years on. Absolutely. You can look at the poor recruitment, you can look at the poor selection of managers, which has meant this mishmash of a squad that is really built for about 4 different managers. And that absolutely is an issue of why they're trying to have to get so many out the door. However, what I would say is it is an issue that is affecting quite a few Premier League clubs now. And the reason, really, on the whole, is wages. Is because the Premier League wages compared to wages on the continent, there's such a disparity. And the issue then is getting players who are very well paid out of the door without some kind of financial recompense in terms of I don't know, a payoff kind of fee, or if you're doing a loan, what kind of percentage the loan club takes. And that's where, unless you've got this kind of, you're part of this Saudi exodus at the moment, where honestly, the clubs that are getting the money for this must be rubbing their hands in glee because it must be the solution to so many issues. Whereas typically at Spurs, the players that the Saudi clubs have looked at, the ones that either Spurs didn't want to let go, or in Harry Kane's case, he'd already made up his mind where he wanted to go. I'm sure that somewhere Daniel Levy is going, please come in for Tongi. Please come in for Tongi. I'm sure he is somewhere. Because Tongi must be I suppose with Hugo Larice, they must be the 2 highest earners they're trying to get off the wage bill. So yes, I'm sure there's probably someone on Spurs' behalf currently going around all the Saudi clubs saying, I've got this list of players. Anyone I can interest? You could kind of imagine him like a traveling salesman opening a briefcase. I can do you a Tongi, and I can throw you in a Jed Spence as well. How does that sound to you? Because quite frankly, Spurs are at the mercy of all of these half-interested clubs right now. And I guess some people would say I suppose some people would say it's karma, I suppose, because this is the way that Spurs have often approached transfer windows themselves. They've waited until the last minute with certain deals, hoping that the selling club becomes frustrated or concerned that they're not going to be able to sell the player and do the last bits of business that they want to do. And then they've swooped in. So I guess there is a certain amount of irony that pretty much every club is currently doing this with Spurs with their players. Because let's be honest, when you signal to the world that players are available for transfer, when they're not even in matchday squads, when the fans refer to them as deadwood fodder, whatever you want to call them, I think it's quite clear that they might be keen to get rid of these players at any price, pretty much. So yeah, you've just got clubs now waiting to see how desperate Spurs get in the final week, and yeah, it was never really going to happen the other way. And look, we get it. We see people on social media all the time saying, "Just sell them, get rid." I've seen people saying, "Just let them rot." That's the other one. It's like, sorry, you let someone rot on 200 grand a week sitting there on the sidelines. Yes, Spurs are, a club that have got more money rolling in because of the stadium, but can they afford someone that's going to cost them like about £1 million a month just sitting there doing nothing, not registered to play any football whatsoever? I'd imagine not. They've got to try to get them off the books in some capacity, even if it is a loan where the loan club pays 40% of their wages, let's say. It's yeah, I think the problem, the frustration, is definitely comes from the fact that it happens so much. I can understand where the frustration comes from with the fans, because it feels like every single transfer window you and I are talking about this scenario, and it's the same players every time, which again I can only go back to the recruitment, and it just shows how poor recruitment has been, that you're talking about players that aren't really particularly in demand by that many clubs elsewhere. I do think there's a stigma to it slightly if you failed at Spurs, in terms of, that sounds really weird, but you know what I mean is that, let's say Chelsea, if you're a Chelsea player and it hasn't worked, I think a lot of clubs will look at it and go, well, yeah, but Chelsea win loads of stuff and they've got a squad with 76 players in it. Yeah, let's go in there and take some of their players that they don't even realize are that good. Whereas maybe when they see Spurs finish, 8th in the league and they don't want players, and they're probably thinking, yeah, well, maybe they're not actually that good. And that's maybe the issue. There's less of a luster around Spurs players than maybe someone from Chelsea. But yeah, they've got to get moving, because as much as we don't want to hear it and the fans don't want to hear it, it is all tied up with incomings. And incomings are reliant on outgoings. And it's not a financial thing. It's to do with the squad numbers. Guesty, take it away. Just for anyone that hasn't heard it, explain exactly why squad numbers are so important right now.
Yeah, I will do in a minute. One thing I just want to say is, obviously you mentioned wages problematic, given obviously other clubs in Europe can't afford to pay anywhere near the amount clubs in the Premier League can. Another issue is the length of contracts, really, for Tottenham, because you've brought in players on long contracts. They've obviously not hit the ground running. They've struggled, and now you're in a situation where you're looking to either send them out on loan or let them leave permanently. And I mean, this situation could carry on for another couple of years in terms of, player X, player Y, if they're not impressing, if they're not taking their opportunity, because there's not going to be a buyer there. And I suppose it comes down to, you might be better offering players contracts, 3 years, maybe 4 years, absolute max. But then again, when you look at it from a player's perspective, I suppose, well, they might be able to go somewhere else where they can get 5-year, 6-year contracts, and they've got this guaranteed money. So it's a bit of a difficult situation. And I suppose, I mean, take Chelsea, for example. I've no idea how that's going to play out for them over the coming years when they've been offering players like 7-year contracts, 8-year contracts. I mean, look at Tiamoe Bakayoko, who was there. He must have been signed on a 5-year or 6-year contract. I think he's only just left this summer. He seemed to have spent every year out on loan for the past 4 years just because it didn't work for him. So, yeah, whilst wages aren't helping Tottenham out, I think the length of contract certainly isn't as well. But, you know, you can understand it. Them offering long contracts, they see the players as, you know, a huge part of the future going forward. And unfortunately, it's just not turned out like that. But getting back onto the squad numbers then. Right.
You know what? Just before you launch
Go
into
on.
that, only because it's like breaking in a way. Alfie Devine going to Port Vale.
Okay.
Just been messaged that as we're on the pod. So there you go. So that felt a little bit like Sky Sports Newsy there, didn't it? When they had to look at their phone kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's a good move. I think that's just about right for him right now. League One. They are League One, aren't they, Port Vale?
Yeah, Port Vale are
Yeah.
League One. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the kind of level they seem to like to send the kind of 18, 19-year-olds at, just to not thrust them into the Championship and the glare too early. Let them develop slightly lower. I think that's a great move for Alfie.
I was thinking with Alfie, could have been Bristol City as a replacement for that Alex Scott. So I think he's gone to Bournemouth, obviously play for England under 20s alongside each other. I think so.
Oh, really? Because he's one of his best mates.
Yeah,
we were talking about him out on the tour when I interviewed Alfie, and I was tempted to go like, have a word with you. I thought it wasn't very professional.
Yeah, but no, Port Vale's a good move. Should be plenty of opportunity to play week in, week out there. And Spurs, like Spurs have done in the past when they've sent players out, they can review it in January and then maybe recall them and then send them elsewhere. So, yeah, getting back onto squad numbers then. Right. Once the transfer window's closed for business, Premier League clubs have to submit a 25-man squad to the Premier League for the forthcoming season. Up to a total of 17 of those 25 players, non-homegrown, and then the rest can be made up of homegrown players. There's a separate list for players who are 21 and under. Basically, I think it's this year, if you were born after 1st of January 2002, you can be included on this list. So helps Tottenham out massively with Destiny Udogie, Pape Matar, Dane Scarlett being included on that list. And as things stand, this is even with Troy Parrott and Alfie Devine moving. Tottenham are, they've got 31 players over the age of 21. So we're at a situation now with 1 week to go. Ange Postecoglou, Daniel Levy and the club need to move on 6 players, basically just to hit this 25-man mark. If they don't move 6 players on, then that unfortunately means some will get left out of the squad. This is nothing new at Tottenham because it's happened in the past in terms of the European squad, but the rules do slightly differ. Not going to bother going into that, as obviously Tottenham aren't in Europe this season, and obviously just getting yourself into a massive hole because of the different rules. But yeah, as things stand, Tottenham at minimum need to move 6 players on, but we've got a list of players here. Could be about 10 players here who could potentially move on. So yeah, an awful lot to do.
No, it really is. It's incredible. And this is the thing, it's, as we're going to talk about over the course of this, it's like Spurs are linked with various centre-backs, but how do you bring in a centre-back right now when you've got 5 centre-backs in your squad? And I definitely can understand why people get frustrated and say, "Oh yeah, but bring them in and then sort it out after." It just doesn't work like that, because you just can you imagine having players just sat there unable to play any kind of football? And like I say, the financial side, when I said earlier about it costing almost $1 million a month, let's say for one of those, let's say if, I don't know, Larice or Ondembele were to stick around and not be able to be registered, yeah, that's one player. If you end up with like 3, 4, 5 players, you just the drain, and and people want to see transfers. They want to see money put towards transfers, but if that money is going towards players that are sitting there doing nothing, then it is throwing money away. So yeah, it's just crazy that they allow themselves to get into this situation every single time. And when you look at it, it's Kane, Winks, and Roden are the only ones that have actually gone out of the squad. You could argue, if you wanted to throw in there, Lucas Moura, obviously, end of his contract. Danjuma and Longlay's loan ended. So yes, at the moment there's 6 less players, but then I suppose you could also argue on that Winks and Roden weren't even at the club last season anyway. They're both out on loan. And yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Like you say, so you need 6 just to balance your books going out the door. I suppose you could argue, and we'll talk about him briefly later on, someone like a Gift Orban doesn't affect your numbers anyway. It goes on that under 21 list. So yes, if they desperately wanted to move for him and were happy with the price, you could get that done, and it doesn't really affect anything else other than adding to a big wage bill that hasn't been cleared, I suppose, if they're looking at it from financial terms. My feeling is that when it comes to like a transfer incoming wise, I think maybe one move starts a domino effect if there's a bigger one. I don't know if loans particularly do it. My thinking is maybe Højbjerg, if let's say Atletico Madrid were to seriously kind of come in with a proposal that actually kind of was enough to entice Spurs, then maybe Højbjerg going starts to actually kick off some proper activity. Presumably, we know they'd probably have to look at a midfielder to come in to replace him. I don't know if it'd be a direct replacement kind of midfielder, whether it would be someone a little bit different, maybe a bit more attacking. But I do wonder whether that would be the case. And the Højbjerg situation itself is quite interesting because you have a player who, let's be honest, despite whatever some Spurs fans were criticising for, he has probably been one of the more consistent, well-known Premier League midfielders in recent years. And that in itself, I think, allows you to set a certain price tag for him. He's, Danish international, performs very well as well on the international stage. So he's not a guy that you really should let go for free. However, not free, for cheap. But however, he also is in the final 2 years of his contract. And if you don't sell him this summer, then you have the scenario once again in a year's time where he is one of these players in the last 12, 11 months of his contract. And then suddenly, can you get anything for him? Does he sit it out and get a free transfer at the end of it all? This is the issue that Spurs keep getting themselves into. That maybe that's the other part, as well as recruitment and the constant changing of managers, meaning a messed up squad. Maybe it is also giving contracts, when they give contracts, how long they give contracts for, and maybe not what's the word? Rewarding players at the right times with new contracts. I mean, it may be that it's out of their hands. Maybe players like Harry Kane have not wanted to sign a new contract at that point. Maybe that's what it is as well. So it can't be all their fault, but definitely it just feels like they get into this situation with too many players. And we looked back, didn't we, on a podcast months back at the Champions League final team that Spurs had. The amount of money they got for a team that reached the Champions League final is only now boosted by Kane. At the time when we did that podcast, it wasn't a few months back because it was after Winks went, because we said it was Winks for 10 million and Ericsson for about 20. So they got 30 million for an entire Champions League. There was some nominal fees like Sissoko for 3 million and little tiny Alderweireld for 2 or 3 million. But yeah, Kane has pretty much helped that with his kind of 100 million coming in. But still, I think that is a good indicator of how Spurs just are unable to sell properly and at the right times. I guess people could argue maybe they got as much as they possibly could for Harry Kane, but then other people would argue, did they really have to? Did they really have to allow that situation to happen in the first place? But yeah. So I suppose it's time to dive in now. I suppose we started with Højbjerg. Højbjerg, what do you think will happen with Højbjerg?
I think he'll still be at the club come the start of September.
It's very possible.
Yeah, very. I think looking at it, it seems to be Atletico seems to have a few financial issues. So whether or not they can finance this move remains to be seen. There was talk the other day of Rodrigo de Paul heading off to Saudi Arabia for around 30 million euros. But reports from Argentina the other day suggested that he's spoken with Diego Simeone's boss at Atleti, and he's staying now. So quite where Atleti now get this money from to, make a move for Højbjerg come to fruition. I don't know. From the player's perspective, he needs to be playing week in, week out. Ever since he joined Tottenham 3 years ago, he practically started every single game, and he's been on the bench for both Premier League games this season. Came on against Manchester United, played the final 15 minutes, thought he performed well, looked tidy on the ball. I think you need that experience in there. So for me, I certainly wouldn't be against keeping him because all it takes is 1 or 2 injuries and, you could be short in there. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But, I mean, if you're selling him, you want a good fee for him. It's just quite whether Atletico can offer the sort of money Tottenham want. But for a player of Højbjerg's quality, I won't be looking to sell him on the cheap.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah, as I said, I don't think you can. I think it sends out quite a bad message as well to then when you're trying to get the rest of the players on the books. It really does ram home that message that we just need to get rid of anyone that's not in Ange's like first team thinking kind of thing. And the thing with Højbjerg is he only needs an injury or two, and he's probably straight back in that first team lineup again. And who knows? I think people do like to get quite down on Højbjerg and stuff, but actually, other than the odd backwards pass when he came on against United, I actually thought he did quite well against. And I'm sure he's an adaptable player, and I'm sure he could switch to the Postecoglou way without any issues if need be. I just think contract-wise, whether it makes more sense for them to try to do a deal, and presumably, I guess he'd want to play in the Champions League and all that sort of stuff. And the fact that he's not starting matches at the moment, and you've got like Sarr and Skip ahead of him as well, suggests that either that's the case behind the scenes, that there's an awareness that he would be happy enough to move on if a move materialized. I guess it's a bit like Kane, isn't it? In that Kane was happy to stay if need be, if nothing could be agreed, but obviously was equally happy to move on if something could be. And I wonder if that's exactly the same with Højbjerg. We'll see what happens with Højbjerg. But I mean, obviously, if him going would then naturally lend itself to looking at who would come in. We know that like Conor Gallagher, that's one name. Obviously, Chelsea have suddenly flooded themselves with more midfielders. At the point, it looked like Conor Gallagher was going to start every game, and now suddenly they've got a lot more options again. So whether his situation changes in the last week or so, we'll see. But and then you look at someone. Do you go something different like Eze at Palace? Big money. I think that clearly is going to be the issue, and whether Palace really want to let him go, especially after tying down Elise and Zaha going. You'd want to keep Eze at your club. If I'm Palace, that's probably what I'd want to do, and maybe it's something you look at in a year's time. But then there is the element that he is a CAA-based player. He is, CAA-based, if you're not aware, the big agency that represent a lot of Spurs players, first team, academy, and represent Postecoglou. So they got Postecoglou, Sonny, Maddison, Porro, Richarlison. Who else they got? They've got another. Oh, they've just got Pape Matar Sarr recently has signed up for him as well. So Eze is one of theirs, and actually Alfie Devine that we were talking about earlier, I think he's CAA based, so is Dane Scarlett, a load of the talented youngsters are. There's that, I don't say ease of making it happen, but it's a pathway that's slightly less cluttered because it is an agency that is so strongly linked with Tottenham Hotspur. But yeah, I just wonder whether it's too much money right now, and would Eze? I know this sounds ridiculous, and fans will be going, "Of course he would." Would Eze start every week in the Postecoglou, or would he be the Maddison rotation?
I don't know. I mean,
isn't it?
who do you drop? Because there's some really, really good players in Tottenham's midfield. I think it's one of these.
Comes back as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of the strongest in the Premier League. Obviously, he can play bit further forward as well on the wings, but there's great competition there, as well. And I think Man City have been linked with him over the past couple of days. So, I mean, that's going to be a massive pull if, they can get him, because they can offer Champions League football, a couple of medals come the end of the season. But no, I think Eze would be a really, really good signing. It's just, would he play every week? But then again, I suppose you can say the same for a lot of the players at Tottenham, because there's a lot of competition.
There is, but are you more willing to go into somewhere where there's more competition when it is like a Man City or something? And you think, well, at least I'm definitely getting silverware out of it. I suppose it's on the talk with Big Ange and how he sells a club, but yeah, I still think money-wise, is that the kind of deal that Spurs would do? Who knows? Who knows whether they want to make a late statement because of the Kane stuff? May well have a go. The classic have a go. But yeah, I was trying to think. Otherwise, in that central midfield area, where there's a kind of a name that ends up coming out from left field late on. But those are the two that we kind of constantly kind of hearing within the club and outside the club being linked to maybe replacing Højbjerg if he were to go to Atletico. I mean, the Atletico situation itself is interesting because obviously they've had financial issues, and whether they have to structure something in a certain way to even be able to afford him. I think they were hoping for some Saudi money coming in as well. I think they had 2 or 3 players that were interested because was it what's his name? DePaul, wasn't it? Was one that was linked, but I think the last on that was it had fallen through, or it was a bit shaky whether that deal was even going to happen or not. Spurs could probably do with Atletico getting some money in from somewhere if they are going to have any hope of Højbjerg going out the club. Moving on from Højbjerg, Larice. What happens to Hugo Larice?
I think he'll get his move. It's just strange that it's not happened so far. There's a lot of talk about a transfer to Lazio, but it seems to be he'd be number 2. And given his age, final few years of his career, surely he just wants to be playing. So yeah, a week to go for Hugo to get his move. I wonder if it just gets to the stage maybe when it was like Serge Aurier, and there was just maybe like a mutual termination of the contract, because
maybe
obviously Larice has made it clear that he wants a new challenge. He's one of the highest earners at the club, so you need to move him on. But because he's been such a long servant, you want to do it right, don't you? By him, let him pick his club when the offers come in. Yeah, I don't know how this one will play out, but I think he will get his move. I'm not sure where though.
Yeah, I guess the decision for Larice to make is whether he goes somewhere. He'll want to go somewhere and be first choice. But a lot of the clubs, it sounds like or not a lot of the clubs, but some of the clubs, certainly Lazio was one of them. There was an indication that he might be going in there as potentially a second choice. And I guess you kind of wonder at this point in your career, is he ready yet to do that? Is he ready to go in somewhere as a backup keeper? Obviously, there will be some point when he'll have to decide, do I become like a Fraser Forster and become like an experienced head backing up and helping a younger keeper learn? But yeah, is there a scenario where it stays at Spurs at all?
But he's going to be second choice even if he stays.
Exactly.
So I can't see that happening.
I can't. I can't. I think, like you said, I think they would have to come to some kind of agreement. And the Saudi window is open later, isn't it? So I wonder if there'll be certain players that can't get a move anywhere, whether Premier League clubs will maybe hold fire for another week or 2 before making any contract decisions, see whether a Saudi club will come in. And because let's be honest, even if a Saudi club came in and said, we'll take him off your hands, we won't pay a fee, but we'll pay all his wages, that still probably is more, well, it definitely is financially more beneficial to someone like Tottenham, because Spurs then don't have to kind of pay him off in the last year of his contract or come to some agreement of it. But it's whether Hugo Larice wants to go to Saudi League. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, Larice, I do find it strange that, what was it, June? Was it June that he publicly said that he wants to leave the club?
Yeah.
And now we're in almost the end of August and he hasn't actually been able to find a club. that must be quite difficult for him, I'd imagine. You know, you're a World Cup winner, played in another World Cup final as well, being up there among the best keepers in the Premier League for almost a decade. 11 years he was at Spurs in all. But can't get himself a move anywhere yet. I mean, I suppose I know he's got to pick the right one for his family, everything. I always thought he'd just go back to Nice. That was always going to be the plan, was to go back to his hometown club. Maybe there's not the scenario right now for him to be able to do that. Maybe financially as well, it's not quite right. And the other one I thought was maybe he'd end up going to the MLS. I think his wife's got a very successful kind of clothing line for children that is quite big in America, and I wondered whether that would tie in nicely with that, but that hasn't at this point come to fruition. There's some talk that maybe the Lazio deal isn't dead completely, but then the reports in Italy kind of suggest that like Sarri doesn't actually want him, and it's like, what? Why would that deal even be happening, kind of thing? So yeah, we'll find out what happens with Larice. But the fact is, you know, he's no longer captain. Sonny's the captain. Spurs have moved forward without him. It's Vicario and Forster and Austin are clearly the goalkeepers. He's kind of got to find a move. Can he move after as well? Sort of Saudi aside, if he's a free agent, is there a certain period after that you can move for before you register?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I imagine there'll be a squad deadline in place.
Yeah, I think Premier League,
you'll need
isn't
to
it
be
like the next
registered.
day?
Yeah, I don't know. Let's
Yeah,
just hope he gets his club before deadline day, so we're not into this, you know, the murky waters of that scenario. But yeah, let's see what happens with Hugo. Right, next player, Jed Spence.
Oh, Jed.
What do you think then with Jed Spence? What does this next week have in store for him?
I think this is one scenario where Jed has to really decide what he wants to do. I think a lot of these are on the clubs coming in and whether any come in. With Jed, I think it's slightly the other way, in that he needs to decide what he wants to be, not what he wants to be, but where he wants his career to go at this point. Because from what I understand at the moment, the only interest in him is from clubs in the Championship, and there's a little bit of interest from Italy as well. And all the indications that I'd had so far is that he wants to really just stay in the Premier League. And if there's no interest there, what does he do? You know, is he, I guess, become quite comfortable with what he's got at Spurs in terms of, I'm sure he'll, you know, be earning a lot more than he was when he was at Middlesbrough. Will he just be comfortable to sit? Because let's be honest, he's going to sit there and watch. Unless there's a major injury crisis, Jed Spence is nowhere in the pecking order, anywhere near Pedro Porro and Emerson Royale. He's just not. It's a deal that hasn't worked out in any shape or form for him or the club. You know, the moment I knew it was all going wrong was when I asked. I was only asking Conte about transfers in general out in Korea last year, and he came out with that infamous, "Well, the club want to buy him." You know, club wanted to bring him in, and it was just like, oh my goodness, this is all. And he hasn't even signed at that point. We had to kind of hold that over a couple of days until he actually had put pen to paper. So he was already decided before the guy joined that he wasn't really a player that he wanted. And then let's be honest, we can't put it all on Conte because he then didn't really impress. I mean, yes, he didn't get many minutes for Spurs. I think I totaled it up as about 5 minutes of normal time across 4 games. I looked at it, it's 89th minute, 89th minute, 89th minute, and then 88th minute in the Premier League came on for Conte. But then he went to Rennes, played, I think it was 11 games in a row because quite cleverly, his people or Spurs picked a club where they knew both right backs were out injured, so they had to play him. As soon as one of those right backs came back, bang, Jed was out of the team. And I know he was the captain, to be fair, at Traoré at Rennes, so it was probably more likely he was going to come in, but he just didn't even get a sniff after that. And then he obviously got the knee injury that took him back to Spurs. Then just hasn't impressed Postecoglou, hasn't really made any mark at all. We saw out in Australia, Thailand, and Singapore when they were doing the training, Jed was just part of we called them the bomb squad because they were the players that we imagined were being bombed out, because they were in this little kind of group of 5 or 6 training while the 2 sets of 11 were playing each other in the practice matches before games, the night before an open training. And Jed was just there with the likes of Harvey White, Joe Roden. It was all the players, and actually Eric Dyer. But I think Eric Dyer was more of an injury thing at that point. Tongi was another. It was all the players that essentially we're now looking to go out of the club. So yeah, Jed's got to really decide, I guess, what comes next in his career. Does he want to be a guy that's happy to just sit there watching on, comfortable in, I'm sure there'll be a very good contract for him? Or does he think, I'm 23 years old now, if I've got to step back down to the Championship, sometimes you've got to take a step back just to be able to make strides forward afterwards. And maybe that's what he needs, just to have a bit of a reset. I think playing as a right back would be very good for him as well. I think this has been one of the issues. He was brought in very specifically to be a wing back for Spurs, and obviously they don't play with wing backs now. And there's been question marks about his defending and his ability to defend, and that was what came out in France as well. There was some suggestions that that Bruno Genesio, although he does have a thing about trusting permanent players over loan players, the other issue was that maybe he felt that Jed's defending wasn't quite good enough to be in a back four. Although he did have a very good game against PSG, didn't he? It was Mbappe and Messi and the likes he was up against, and they kept a clean sheet. But yeah, I get the impression that's something that he needs to kind of rid from people's perceptions of him. And yeah, we'll see what happens with Jed. And it sounds awful, but I hope he goes. And hopefully people understand my meaning behind that. It's not, I hope he goes, I hate him, I want him out of the club. I want him to go because I think he needs the football. He needs to develop, and he needs to, like I say, just do a bit of a reset on his career, really. Because I think Spurs would be quite happy to let him go permanently, which is a sad indictment of a guy that only joined a year ago. But I don't think they'd get the money for him. So I'd imagine it will be a loan. And it's about him adding value back onto his himself. Oh, there you go. They've actually confirmed Alfie Devine's move as well. That was very much in the advanced stages. So he has headed off to Port Vale. Let me just get that online. I think it is for the entire season. What do you think about Jed Spence while I'm looking at it?
Spence just needs to go for the sake of his own career. I think, what did he play? Probably around 16 games in all competitions last season. He's at the age where he needs to be playing week in, week out. He cannot afford another season where basically he doesn't play, because then you're in this situation maybe where it's out of sight, out of mind, and that's going to impact him in 12 months' time. Clubs might not be there for him, so he's got to play. You can understand why you'd want to stay in the Premier League, because obviously his goal will be to become a very good Premier League player, and he needs that experience because he never got it at Tottenham. But if those offers aren't there, go down to the Championship again, show everyone, why Tottenham signed you in the first place. And, if he can, have a huge impact like he did at Nottingham Forest, and that's only going to bode well for his career, and there might be a move for him after that, or potentially another opportunity for him at Tottenham. But it's down to Jed. He just needs to move. He can't have a season not playing, because it's just no good for him at all.
Yeah, not at that age. You can't sit still really at that age. Alfie Devine is for the rest of the season to Port Vale. Right. So yeah, good move for him.
Yep, right. We'll group the centre backs together now. Japet Tanganga, Eric Dyer, and Davinson Sanchez as well. I think we'd imagine Tanganga probably will be heading out of the door, just because there's going to be no opportunities there for him really in the first team. He's not been in the squad so far this season. I think there's been links with Luton Town, Inter Milan, and there was talk of Everton over the past few days. What I don't understand that link personally. I think there's better.
Don't want him at Everton.
I think there's better defenders already at the club. I don't really see him as an improvement on Michael Keane personally. And no, and adding his injury history, it don't make sense for me. But there you go. So I think he'll go. Then it's the choice between Eric Dyer and Davinson Sanchez, and I think out of the two, I'd be looking at moving Eric Dyer on. Now Sanchez seems more suited to Ange Postecoglou's system, and he's been in the matchday squad in both games. Eric Dyer hasn't. In terms of Dyer, I know he wants to probably stay and fight for his place at Tottenham. He's been at the club for 9 years now. Euro 2024's on the agenda next summer. He was in England's World Cup squad, and he's probably going to be an outside bet for the Euros. And obviously players like Levi Colwill and that'll have jumped ahead of him since the World Cup. But given he's still an outside bet, Gareth Southgate is a big fan of him. He's been in, the vast majority of his squads in the past. Dyer needs to be playing if he wants to play for England at this Euros. So I'd be looking at moving on Dyer. And I think for him, he probably needs to move because he's just not going to play.
Yeah. Again, I know it's boring for people listening. It all comes down to the contract situations again, especially with Dyer and Sanchez. So Dyer and Sanchez are both now in the last 10
last
months?
year. Yeah.
Yeah, it's only like 10 or 9 months left. It's not even that long. And so with Eric Dyer, Spurs can't really loan him out. Because if you loan him out, essentially he's seeing out his contract. And also he'd be willing to look at a loan move, from what I understand, but seems to be they're less kind of keen to do a permanent move. But then maybe that's because if the club aren't going to offer him a new contract, then maybe he's thinking, well, then I could leave on as a free agent next summer, and I can maximise what I can get out of things. And I suppose that's his right to do. I know it frustrates fans, but I guess it is his right to do. If he's been there and it'll be a decade next summer, and the club aren't going to offer him a new deal, or he can't agree a new deal with them, then why shouldn't he have the right to decide, I suppose, what happens in his future? It's really difficult because I think obviously there's the element of fans being frustrated at Eric Dyer, not liking Eric Dyer, whatever. It was really interesting. We had leftover part of the interview he did on Delhi out in Singapore, which got used this week. It was kind of good and unfortunate timing all in one, because it was him talking about the fact that he never looks at social media, doesn't care about criticism on there. People can essentially say what they want, and they're shouting into an empty room because Eric Dyer isn't there and listening to them. So it doesn't really matter to him. And he also said that, he wants to play. But again, we've got to kind of caveat that with the fact that he said this, 3-4 weeks ago, before he'd been left out of entire squads. So yeah, I'm sure, like you said, with the Euros in mind, he said he wanted to play at the Euros. That yes, a move for him this season. I guess that's what it's going to come down to, isn't it? I think you've probably hit the nail on the head there. He's got to decide what's maybe more important to him. Is it trying to force his way back into the England team in time for the Euros? Or is it creating a scenario for himself where next summer at 30 years old, he can get the best possible contract that I wouldn't... For a centre-back, you're unlikely to be the last big contract of your career at 30. You've probably got a bit longer. But certainly is going to be maybe the last most important contract, maybe you could say, of his career, biggest contract. So I completely could understand that way of thinking. But he's got to decide, I suppose, whether it's about the football or the finance. And whether, at this moment in time, he's one injury away from getting back in the Spurs squad. If there's an injury this week to Van der Ven, Romero or Sanchez, it's Dyer on the bench. As in Eric Dyer on the bench. It's not a Dyer situation on the bench. And with Sanchez, exactly the same situation in terms of 9-10 months left on his contract. We've said it before. I think he fits the Postecoglou system better purely because of his pace with the high line. I think it works for him. I do worry about Eric Dyer, and having seen that high line in operation now, and how quickly Van der Ven, Romero, and the fullbacks have had to rush back, I can't see Dyer being in that scenario. And I can understand as well why Clement Longley would not have fitted into it as well. Kind of beforehand, I was thinking, well, technique-wise, same with Dyer, you can see how they could work in it. But as soon as you really see it in operation, you need pace. You just need pace, and I think you would struggle. There'd be so many occasions where they'd be caught short, or they'd have to maybe compromise with Vicario really coming quite high up the pitch to really be such a sweeper keeper. So yeah, with Sanchez again, we saw Spurs accepted a bid from Spartak Moscow. It was about 12 million. So that's the kind of figure. And I think, despite the fact that he fits the system better, they can't afford probably to turn down bids. And if there is one that comes in for Sanchez, and Sanchez feels he's going to play week in, week out there, then he's probably likely to go. And like you say with Tanganga, interest in the Premier League, interest from Italy. This has always been the fascinating thing with Tanganga, because his representatives Italian background, or maybe even Italian, I can't remember. There's always been Italian clubs interested in him, and it's always quite. It was weirder to begin with. It's not so much now in recent years because of the kind of amount of English players that have played out in Serie A now. It's kind of become a real thing. So, yeah. Can you see a scenario where all three go?
No, I think one of the three will stay. Because surely if all three go, do you then need 2 defensive incomings?
I think so. The only alternative is you bring in one, and then you trust Davies and maybe Ashley Phillips to continue to develop to be it's even that's a little bit iffy though, isn't it? Even Davies is very much a makeshift centre back in a back four, especially, and his height we saw in pre-season kind of was the undoing of him as a centre back on a couple of occasions. And Ashley Phillips is very much a work in progress right now. He's training with the first team. Made his under-21s debut the other day as well. Oh, I should stress, only because people have been asking me so much about it. Alasdair Veliz, the young Argentinian striker that came on board, he is alive. He is playing with, training with Spurs. He's training with the first team. He got his work permit. I've written that a million times, and people are still asking me, presuming he hasn't got his work permit. Got his work permit 24 hours after he joined. Him and Van der Ven got him at the same time. And yes, he is training with the first team, has been training with the first team. But as Postecoglou said, don't expect to see him for the first half of the season. It's going to be very much an adaptation, kind of 6 months, 4 months or so, 5 months, where he gets to know a very, very different culture, league, and style of football and lifestyle and everything. So yeah, I do think it's a bit odd that we haven't really seen much of him in training photos, but from what I understand, he has been training with the first team. Maybe it's that they don't want to hype him up too much. Maybe they don't want to create, I guess, what happened around Jed Spence. Exactly a similar scenario where there's one player who wasn't ready yet, was being hyped up a lot. And, I guess we have to kind of take our part in that as well. We were playing a role in that too, purely because the right backs weren't playing particularly well at the time as well. So, maybe what you don't see becomes suddenly even more appealing. And with Veliz, I guess it's because Spurs are struggling to score goals up top in the early games of the season. So Veliz suddenly becomes this wunderkind kind of thing, doesn't he? This amazing wonder kid ready to come into the team, whereas I don't think he's quite at that stage yet. He had a good good last season in the Argentinian top flight. But yeah, it's a whole different ball game in the Premier League. So yeah, sorry. It's just I had so many people asking me about that. I thought I'd give that a little answer out there. But I can't see all three going. I think one stays of the centre backs, and they bring in one more centre back. And who that is, we shall see. I mean, Per Schurz, obviously, Torino, heavily linked, and Spurs definitely like him. He's kind of one of those that's on their database lists where they're looking at good players to fit the Postecoglou system. Tosin Adarabioyo is an interesting one. There definitely has been a lot of interest in him, but from what I understand, there hasn't been any contact regarding him from Spurs in the last a little while anyway. That was as of, when did I last ask about him? Late yesterday. So unless something's happened today, there hadn't been any contact. But then we were saying this before we came on air, that would Spurs really be kind of pressing with a lot of contact over players they want to bring in when they really need to get them out first? I don't think. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're just kind of waiting to see. Maybe being asked to be kept updated on players like that in case something happens, like his move to Monaco does go through or doesn't go through. But ultimately, you're probably not pushing right now too much for players that you don't have the space for. But yeah, we'll see with the centre-back situation. It's an area that definitely is the one that's probably likely to have the most movement, you'd imagine, in the squad.
Yeah, just quickly to say something on Eric Dyer before we move on to the midfielders. Obviously, you said maybe a potential loan you could be interested in. Do you then get to a situation if he goes on loan, extend his contract by 12 months just to retain the market value? I mean, that's what Brentford have done with Dyer,
maybe.
who joined Arsenal. I can't imagine that will go down too well with the fan base, but right. We'll move on to the midfielders anyway, because we've already spoken about Højbjerg, but there's a couple more. Tongi on Ndombele and Harvey White. Harvey White's no squad number. There's so many midfielders ahead of him in the pecking order. It's in the last year of his contract, permanent move. Don't think we need to say anything more on that. He needs a permanent move for the sake of his career, just to play regularly. And then Tongi on Ndombele. This is going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the final week, because he's a player who has undoubted qualities, but he's just not done enough on his loan spell with Lyon, with Napoli. So there should be interested clubs in him because he has all the talent in the world, but because he's not shown that, the clubs really aren't queuing up at the door for his services.
Yeah, Tongi. I could do a podcast just on Tongi, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, we've said it previously that, he hasn't impressed Postecoglou. Attitude, application, timekeeping, all rather lacking, unfortunately, from what we understand, and that hasn't gone down well. There was interest from clubs in Turkey, which at this point doesn't seem to have caught Tongi's attention. Yeah, again, I think he's got 2 years left, same as Højbjerg. I think he is one that Spurs would probably accept a loan move for and try to get in an option to buy. But let's be honest, he's had options to buy in both of the last 2 loans, and there's been no interest in actually having that being taken. Again, we just got to come down to recruitment, and you've got to look at that. And obviously, with hindsight, it was very exciting at the time, but the more you researched into it and the more previous coaches had said about Tongi and the differing levels of his desire, I guess is probably the way to put it. It clearly was the record move for Spurs, one of their biggest earners, and has to go down as their biggest flop of all time. I think he has to, unfortunately. He's got incredible talent, and he's one of those players that I love watching playing football. Absolutely adore watching him play football. But ultimately, there's so much more to being a top footballer than just having that natural talent. Yeah, I mean, the only 2 ways now, isn't it? Really, Spurs are going to have to loan him out and cover a load of his wages, or accept a vastly reduced fee for him and pay him off a chunk of his wages just to get him out of the club. It's a shame. I really hoped he'd come back and have a kind of a fire underneath him to prove to Postecoglou that he could be part. And I still think a fully focused Tongi and Ndombele in this system would have been really good. It would have really suited the midfield 3. But alas, no. And yes, his people, as long as he wants them to, have to work very hard, I think, to try and drum up enough interest for him, and Spurs have to do the same.
Right. Before we move on to the strikers, Ali, do you want to let everyone know about the benefits of using NordVPN?
Yeah, if you're not aware by now, the Gold Guest Talk Tottenham podcast is sponsored by NordVPN, and you can use the service in a host of different ways to enhance your internet experience. NordVPN is the fastest VPN in the world. That means there's no buffering, no lagging, and you can stream your favorite shows from anywhere in the world without your bandwidth throttling. A service that people know whenever I talk about Nord, it's something I used for many, many years before they came on board as a podcast sponsor for us, because it's a really good service and it does everything you want from it. You can watch the shows that you'd watch back home that ordinarily, for some unknown reason, they restrict you from watching as soon as you go abroad. But with Nord, you can just switch your device to thinking it's still back home in the UK, and you can watch all of these things. Or the other part of it that's really good is it's ultra safe. It kind of locks down everything that you don't want people getting out of your device when you're using public Wi-Fi. So it's very good at that. And not only that, but the outlay on a NordVPN subscription is cheaper for you in the long run, and that's because you can purchase streaming services or bookings from other countries at a much cheaper rate. So let's say you could book a flight from another country, and that could be cheaper too because you're buying it from that country. So it means you're paying out for Nord, but you're saving money overall. There's a whole host of other benefits from signing up to NordVPN, so why not give it a go? You can grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/goldguest to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan, plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee.
Right, in terms of outgoings and potential incomings, Tottenham have work to do in the final third ahead of the deadline next Friday, which is at 11 p.m. 2 possible outgoings, maybe Dane Scarlett and then Brian Hill. You asked Ange Postecoglou about Dane last week, and he says he's going to obviously decide on him. He's clearly impressed the manager in pre-season. I just wonder if it's one of these where a potential loan deal for Dane is dependent on an incoming in the final third, because Tottenham don't have many out-and-out strikers at the moment, especially if Larice is one for the future and he's not going to be playing. Can't afford to leave yourself too short. So I wonder then if there isn't any incomings, potentially someone like Gift Orban, Brennan Johnson, then Dane Scarlett's your choice on the bench.
Could be. Very briefly before we move completely off defence. Obviously, Sergio Reguilon as well. There's lots of
Yes.
seems to be some interest from Spain in him. I think that's where his stock seems to be the highest still. The biggest thing for Spurs, unfortunately, with Sergio Reguilon is that he just had a nightmare of a season last season. He went away, and if you weren't aware, had he went away with I can't remember if it was a groin or a hamstring injury, and that just wiped out the whole start of his campaign. Then he did come back. Then he was stuck in hospital for a little bit because he had stomach problems, and then I think he started maybe 1-2 games for Atletico Madrid at the moment. It wasn't many at all, especially in La Liga. So in terms of having a season for people to look at, interested clubs, it's like, there's not really a sample there for them. But I think for what he'd done previously, there should still be a little bit of a market. But again, another player they're not going to get anywhere. They spent about 28 million on Sergio Reguilon. They're not going to get that back. So you'd imagine with a couple of years left on his deal, and again, another one where it's a loan to try and build up his value, maybe to try and sell him in his final year. But yeah, back to the attack. Yeah, I did ask about Dane, and Postecoglou was very positive on him. Really kind of has been impressed with what he's seen. And he told me, yeah, this week essentially is the week that he was going to decide whether he needs to head off on a loan, a bit like Alfie's just done. I mean, Dane was at Portsmouth last year, started well, got 6 goals or so under his belt, but then they had a change of manager. John Mousinho came in, replaced Danny Cowley, and just didn't fancy him at all. Just didn't really want to play this kind of young kid. And we had this strange point where he was talking about maybe playing him out as a left winger, and that was where his future lay. And it was a bit like, I don't think Spurs see that or Dane sees that, but and yeah, it didn't really play much towards the end of the season at all. So if he is going to be loaned out, he needs a good loan move. He needs one where he is going to play week in, week out and have the chance to score goals. And like I say, we've just seen Troy Parrott yesterday head out as well. Troy's gone to Excelsior Rotterdam. Do you think it's a good move for him? I think that's the kind of football that will suit. He's a very good technical player, Troy, and I think that will suit him nicely. It's the club where Marcus Edwards went, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
It was actually, I think he then left Spurs. I don't know if that's hopefully not a kind of a pointer to what's to come, but I think it is good for Troy. I think it's a league where we'll get to see now, and this is with no disrespect meant to the Eredivisie, but if Troy is going to be a goal scorer and wants to be seen as a goal scorer, and I know Excelsior aren't one of the big teams in the Netherlands, but he should be able to score in the Eredivisie. He should. If he wants to I know he's only 21, so I'm essentially, I hope I'm not trying to make out his career as like it's stick or twist just by this one move, but I do think he should be able to score more than he did at Preston last season. He only got a couple, didn't he? Was it 4 maybe in all?
Something around that. But he was injured for a few months.
He was in the middle. Yeah, he was in the middle of the season, missed a couple of months, but still, I think it's a part of his game as he was so prolific as a kind of young striker in the academy at youth international level as well. And he's got a few goals for Ireland. I think he's got maybe 3-4 goals for Ireland as well at the senior level. I think now is the time to push on. I still think with Troy, there's this hope that he can convince at Spurs. He was unfortunate this year that he had this little groin injury that stopped him being in consideration for the tour. And then Postecoglou didn't get to have a real look at him there. And then he wasn't handed a squad number, same as Harvey White. And now, he's got this loan move. And I think there's still this hope within him that he has a really good season there, comes back next summer and says, like, look at me, look what I've done, have a little look at what I can do. And I'd love that to be the case, because I think there is a talent there. It's just about developing, isn't it? This is the crucial stage for him now, about what kind of striker becomes, whether he does end up becoming a Premier League striker, or whether he ends up becoming a Football League player, or one that maybe plies his trade abroad. And again, it always comes down to how much they want it. And I've always been impressed with him. Whenever I've spoken to Troy in interviews and stuff, he had a bit of a was it MK Dons where he had a bit of an awakening season, wasn't it? About halfway through, he admits himself that he just realised what it took to be a professional footballer. So I guess he was maybe playing a little bit catch up in the last 18 months of trying to get to where he needs to be. And that time in the Championship will have done him wonders last year as well, in terms of maturing and understanding how difficult the game can be. I think a lot of young players come out of academy football thinking not saying that this is the way he was looking at it, but I think a lot of academy players do see it as, well, this is going to be easy, isn't it? I've scored this many goals, I've done this in the academy, it's just going to be the obvious next step for me. And they suddenly realise, actually, no, only a few players can do that. Everyone, regardless, have got to work incredibly hard to make that step up. And I think that's the thing for Troy now. It's a good move for him in terms of experience, new country, learning very different ways. And the Dutch football, like I say, is very technical. And hopefully gets lots of game time and scores lots of goals. But yes, it does mean that at the moment, Dane Scarlett is that main option as the backup option. You've got Richarlison through the centre. You've got Sonny through the centre as well. I'd imagine that they will bring in another player who can also play through the centre if needed before the window shuts. And I think that will probably see Dane go out on loan. That's my thinking. Who would you like to see come in?
I'm not against Brendan Johnson. I think that'd be.
I'm really surprised by some of the reaction on social media to that. I'm really, really surprised. I think he's such a good young player. And I think I saw Cooper saying, didn't he say in his press conference yesterday, where would we be without Brendan Johnson? I was really surprised. Is it maybe the stigma because he's at Forest and he's playing a team that maybe where he isn't going to get lots and lots of goals? I don't know.
Maybe, but if, say, Brendan Johnson was playing for Gent, like Gift Orban is, then I'm sure everyone would be, loving it and trying to bring him into the club.
I can't argue with you. I can't argue. It's a funny way, isn't it?
Yeah,
How many people have actually seen Gift Orban playing football?
Exactly.
And this is not to say, again, we should stress, because people get very upset sometimes when we say stuff like this. Gift Orban is a talent, and he could be a terrific player. And if he comes to Spurs, we would be very excited about it. But there definitely is this strange bias almost towards players that people haven't seen play. And again, we go back to Jed Spence and Valise and players like that coming in. And it's the same idea. What you don't know is more exciting than what you do know. And there's no real kind of data to support that. Like you say, absolutely. Brendan Johnson plays up top in the Belgian league, probably scores a hell of a lot of goals as well.
Yeah. I'd sign him. I think he did really well at Forest, the season that went up. Then I think last season he had 10 goals, 3 assists in all competitions. As a player who suits Postecoglou down to the ground, due to his attributes.
21-year-old? 10 goals for a 21-year-old in their first Premier League season. Is that a bad thing now?
Not at all. Especially Forest was struggling for probably first half of the season. It was really second half where they turned it on and got themselves out of trouble. But he's got all the attributes to be a Postecoglou player. He's so quick, really good on the ball, skillful. He's versatile. You can play him on the right wing. You can play him behind the striker. He can operate as a central striker. I know Postecoglou said a couple of weeks ago, hinted at potentially not signing an out-and-out number 9 to replace Harry Kane. Maybe this is the future under him at Spurs, having more of a fluid front three, and I think that would work with Johnson. I think that'd be a really, really good signing. And I think Gift Orban would be a good signing as well. But Brennan Johnson, someone who's got a year's worth of Premier League experience under his belt, Postecoglou can take him. Yeah, can take him on to even greater levels, 100%. I think that'd be a really good signing.
Yeah, and this is a player that Spurs have looked at for a while. Paratici would look at him and follow his scout him at the same time as he was scouting Jed Spence and James Garner, who's gone to your lot this season as well. How's he doing? Is he doing all right?
He's a very good player, James Garner. I think he's just one of our best players. Yeah,
well, there you
he's
go.
Brilliant.
Some might suggest that Fabio Paratici maybe knew what he was doing. Who knows? Well, some maybe in the Italian FA, that Football Federation, that don't think that. But yeah, it's. I really like Brennan Johnson. I've always really liked him. And again, when we come back to the bias thing, maybe it is when they're from the UK as well. A foreign player is more exciting to football fans. Maybe there's an element of that. And again, I really don't. This shouldn't be an Orban versus Johnson thing. That's kind of exactly what I'm saying it shouldn't be, because I think Gift Orban, again, I would be very excited to see him. But everyone I've spoken to that covers the Belgian league says exactly the same things. He would need time. Yes, he's very exciting. You watch all the YouTube clips, you see him operate in, I think it's Conference League as well, he's played in as well. And yes, he's an incredibly exciting, raw talent. But there's a lot to his game, and mainly it's the physical side of his game, which of course would be tested far more in the Premier League, that he would have to work on. And the thing with Johnson is, yes, he's more expensive, but he is a guy that now knows the Premier League inside out, and he knows the Championship, and he has got so many of the qualities that Postecoglou looks for. And if I'm Postecoglou, and it certainly seems to be suggestions that Postecoglou is in favour of Brennan Johnson coming in, and I can understand why. I think the key now, it's the price tag, and it's, there's talk about upwards of 40-50 million for him, which is a lot, and it is, as people call it, the Premier League tax, definitely added on, the homegrown tax. But then if Gift Orban there's talk of maybe 30 to 40 for him. And then you're kind of going into that scenario where they're not too far different in their price tags, and is one more of a ready-made bet. Gift Orban more regularly central attacker, whereas Johnson obviously has played mainly on the right for Forest, but has obviously operated through the centre as well. Like you say, everything Postecoglou said seems to lead away from trying to sign a number 9 type. Spurs very quickly distance themselves from Lukaku. The Vlahovic stuff doesn't seem to have gone anywhere at this point, this stage. And I just wonder whether, the money goes more towards a winger type who can also play through the centre, because you've got Richarlison and Sonny that can play through the middle. And if you get to January and definitely you realise, okay, it hasn't worked out with Richarlison, that's maybe when you try to move for another central player. But the coming days will reveal the answer to that. But I really was surprised when I see the Brennan Johnson stuff. I think it maybe is just so many people have got themselves excited about Gift Orban that suddenly this other option, who, like you say, scored 10 goals last season rather than whatever 2021, but maybe people not taking into account that, well, it's the Premier League, which is far harder, and he wasn't playing centrally for a lot of that as well, and yet he's still got 10 goals in his first Premier League season. I don't know, but I'd be very happy with either of those two coming in. They'll be very exciting, and I think there'll be other names that pop up as well, because Spurs have a list of kind of data-led targets and ones that Postecoglou would be very happy to have in as well that fit his system. He said it himself, don't let anyone think that he doesn't decide exactly who will make his squad by the time that transfer window closes. He knows exactly who he wants, who fits his system, and he will have made that very clear. Sounds like he's got a good little relationship going with Leonardo Gabbanini, the chief scout, and he and Postecoglou kind of working with Daniel Levy to get stuff done. Spurs desperately need this director of football to come in, though. I mean, Scott Munn will obviously come in as chief football officer, hopefully next month. But that's not the Paratici role. That's not the director of football role. That still needs to be filled. That little link between Gabbanini, Postecoglou, and Levy. And we shall see what they manage to work out in the meantime.
Yeah, Postecoglou's made such a mark at Tottenham already, such a short space of time. If He wants a player and he believes that player is best for the team, for the system, back him, trust him. I think you've got
Absolutely.
to. Right, you've got to head off in a couple of minutes to
Yes.
Ange Postecoglou's press conference ahead of the Bournemouth game. So quickly, obviously, we're not sure if James Maddison's going to be involved yet. Who comes in for Maddison if he's not fit?
It's got to be Lo Celso. It has to be, really, for me. I mean, he might spring a surprise and maybe go put Sarr, Skip, and Basuma together, but you would think, surely, of any time, this is every pre-season game, Lo Celso was the alternative to Maddison in every second half. We'll find out the exact details on Maddison in this press conference in a couple of hours. The early indications appear to be that whatever happens is likely to be a doubt for this weekend's game. So they would imagine that Lo Celso comes into the frame. I saw there was some Spanish media reports suggesting that he's not happy at the lack of game time and this sort of stuff. But the trouble is if you're the alternative to Maddison and you're playing that left, Maddison's got to come off the pitch for you to get on it. And that's kind of I think he will play, and I think he'll play a fair bit of football this season, Lo Celso, as well. And also, Maddison has had some injury issues in recent years, so there will be times when he was going to be called upon. So I would hope that Lo Celso, after 2 games, has not decided his future needs to be elsewhere. And especially if he gets to play on Saturday tomorrow. Now I think he'll make a good account for himself as well. Give a good account of himself because he's looked really good in the Postecoglou system. He's looked one of the brighter players in pre-season. Personally, that would be the only change I'd make if it needs to be changed. Otherwise, I'd stick with everything else. Even Pedro Porro. I think if it had been an away game, maybe against a team that was absolutely going to constantly threaten Spurs at the back, then maybe I would have considered Emerson. But I think with Bournemouth, you can maybe get away with having Porro going down that right side, especially after a very good defensive display against Man U as well. He deserves all of the plaudits for that, Porro. Really does.
Yeah, I think I'd keep things the same. I'd love Emerson to come back in and just shoot over the stand as he did last year in the game at the Vitality Stadium. But no, I think Porro deserves to keep his place in the team. Right, thank you as ever for tuning in to the latest episode of Gold Guest Talk Tottenham. We'll be back next week, so as ever, just keep with us at football.london for all your latest Tottenham news. To grab our huge discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/goldguest. You can receive an extra 4 months for free, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. You can find the link in the episode description box.